We want to read the plain surface level reading, and then the next step, this is the one we're going to camp out probably the most tonight because it's the hardest for us. And it's Remez, the hint. And what we do in this step is we remember other texts. So the first thing is we tend to think of the Bible as like a bunch of little stories, little snippet, Aesop's fables kind of thing. A bunch of little stories that all have a little moral at the end, but they're not connected with other stories. They're just kind of their own little thing. But that's the opposite. The Bible is one big interconnected story. And when you think about like modern TV shows, right? The writing team in a good writing team in a modern TV series, they're going to be looking to weave storylines together, and you'll have a bunch of storylines going on all at once, and all of a sudden something that happens in episode 12 like takes you back to what happened in episode 2, and they'll even like help you out because it's been a while, unless you binged it. It's been a while since episode 2, so they'll give a little flashback right at the beginning of the show. Remember what happened, and the Bible's full of that. The biblical writing team does this all the time. They make these little like flashbacks and little interconnected storylines all the time, and they want us to find them. So we're supposed to meant to do it. How do we do it? How do we notice the hint? Well, first we ask the question, what else is like this? Now, in order for us to know, it requires us to know the Bible, right? So we got to be in the Word a lot, and we're going to miss stuff a lot, but that's where like it's not up to you to find all the links. Other people are going to find them too, and we want to be in the Word together. So Luke Latour is one of our youth guys on staff, and he'll just randomly text me sometimes and be like, hey, I was reading in Zechariah chapter 1 tonight, and I thought of this and this and this. What do you think? And so, okay, Luke, I'll go read that chapter. It's been a while. I'll go find it, and I'll read it, and maybe in the next day or two, and I'll think about what he said, and I might notice a couple connections that he didn't, and he'll usually notice a few that I haven't, and I'll send him back another text, and hey, what about this and this and this? And we're not in like a small group. We're not in a study. We're just doing this. But we're meant to be reading and processing the Word together because our minds all think a little bit differently, and we help each other. So we ask the question, what else is like this? And then we start looking for Easter eggs. So I don't mean like the Easter bunny and the pastel eggs you looked for as kids with little candy in them. I'm talking about like video games and movies Easter eggs. So an Easter egg in video game world and in the movie world, it's a little visual treat that connects to something else, somewhere else. So let's use the movie Star Wars, the Star Wars movies as examples. We'll talk about Easter eggs in Star Wars. Easter eggs can be visual themes. So here, you've got Darth Vader, the bad guy, and you know he's a bad guy because his laser sword, his lightsaber is red. And every time someone pulls out a red sword, you know they're the bad guy. But if someone has a blue sword, you know they're the good guy. And so the colors are a visual cue to you. No one tells you. Doesn't matter. It's just like there. And whether you pick up on it or not, you pick up on it subconsciously, right? But what happens when someone pulls out a purple sword? Well, it's not red and it's not blue. It's both together. You think that was on purpose? Yes, it was on purpose. They want you to question, is this character good or bad? Or maybe they have a little bit of both in them. So visual cues are one way that movies do this. Another way is repeated events. So in one Star Wars movie, our hero, Luke Skywalker, he sinks his spaceship underwater and it's stuck. And he tries to get it up out of the water, but he's not strong enough and smart enough and powerful enough. He can't do it. He fails. But later in another movie, the exact same thing happens. He sinks his ship underwater and you find out he did it on purpose. But it doesn't matter because this time he's much older and wiser and he's able to get the ship out of the water. Same event, different outcome. We're meant to see them both together, connect the dots, and realize that the character has changed, right? So that's one way Easter eggs work. visual things, repeated events. Another way is shared details. So here's a super nerdy one. Princess Leia in one movie, she's a good guy, and she gets captured by stormtroopers who are the bad guys, and she gets put in a prison. And in her prison cell is prison cell number 2187. You don't need to be taking notes on this unless you want to, but there's tons of like Star Wars Easter eggs you can Google and search. She's in prison cell 2187, but she eventually is able to escape and overcome, right? In another movie, completely other movie, we're introduced to a character who is a stormtrooper. He is one of the bad guys, but his stormtrooper number is 2187. And that's on purpose. And we find out he doesn't want to be a stormtrooper. He's actually imprisoned as a stormtrooper, right? And he's able to eventually escape and overcome. And we're meant to see these two characters in light of each other and connect the dots because of this little detail that no one's going to notice unless you're a super Star Wars nerd, but somebody's a super Star Wars nerd and they noticed and they put it out on Reddit and eventually everybody knew, right? So Remez, a hint, how do we do this biblically? Because the Bible's full of these Easter eggs. What kind of things should we be looking for? It could be a shared concept or a shared situation, right? Like sinking the spaceship, right? It could be shared vocabulary, maybe some of the same words, some of the same language, some of the same phrases that show up over and over again. It could be shared details, like that, 2187 number. This one is super nerdy. You and I aren't, if you do any of this, I'm super impressed. I'm not ever going to do any of this. But ancient Jews definitely did this. The Hebrew alphabet, the letters of the Hebrew alphabet represent numbers. They have numbers attached to them. And so you can look at someone's name or a word and you can get a number out of that word. So David, DVD, I don't remember what it is. Maybe let's say it's 646 or 464 or something, right? That there's a number there, and you can add up the number, and that's the number of his name. And John does this in Revelation when John talks about the Antichrist. The number of his name is 666. He's wanting you to do the number game with the letters of somebody's name who he knew and put it together and say who the guy is, but he's being super sly about it. That's called gematria. It's a super nerdy thing. We're not going to do that. I don't know Hebrew. I'm not going to dig into that. But they did. So it can be as nerdy as like that kind of level of details. But we don't have to go there to make connections. We don't have to be that nerdy. So where do we look? Let's say like we're looking at a passage, my Bible reading for the day, and I'm wondering, like, what else is like this? I'm going to ask the question, right? What else is like this? And I'm going to think for a while. Can I think of any stories? And where should I start thinking? Start at the beginning. Genesis 1 through 11, the prologue, before we get to the story of Abraham, every story you read in the Bible will have a connection back to the beginning. It's probably going to be Genesis 1 through 3. It might be later. It might be the flood or the Tower of Babel, but it's probably going to be Genesis 1 through 3. You might not notice the connection right away. Might take you a while to think about it, right? Maybe not on the first reading. Maybe like months from now or years from now, you read it again and you'll be like, oh, I get it. That happens. But I guarantee you, there's going to be a connection to the beginning of the story. So then you just keep reading and rereading and rereading and rereading and have conversations like Luke and I do over text. Hey, I read this thing. What do you think about, are there connections, And hey, I should spell check stuff. We got lots of tools like cross-references and stepbible.org is one of the tools that I like to use. So let's talk about cross-references. If you have a study Bible, your study Bible probably has cross-references in it. No one ever tells you how to use it. And the study Bible doesn't tell you how to use it. You just assume you should know how. It took me many years before I figured out, that's a tool I can use. I was super intimidated by it. But here's my Bible, and hopefully you can see this. I'll try to explain it good enough if you're in the back. We're in Colossians. I'm reading Colossians right now because we're teaching in Colossians, and so I'm just trying to read with the teachers and keep up with them. So this is verse 10 here. All of a sudden I get to there's a little U up here, right before the head of all rule and authority. There's this little U. What is that little U? Well, I can come over to the side. Here's my cross references, and I can see the number 10 for verse 10, and then there's a little U, and it says, see Ephesians 1:21 and 22. So whoever put this together, they saw a connection between the head of all rule and authority with whatever is written in Ephesians 1:21 and 22. And rather than just say 10 and have that, they also give you a little letter, because some verses will have multiple. Like verse 11, there's a V, and then there's also a W. And so I can come to 11 and I can see the V and the ones that connect to that, and then the W and the ones that connect to that. Now, when I first started looking at these, most of the time I was frustrated because I would read the verse and then I'd go to the connection verse and I'd be like, wait, that's not what I was interested in. And I don't get the connection. And sometimes it's because the connection is in Hebrew and it's lost in translation. Other times it's like they're making a connection on something that is different than what you are paying attention and focused in on. But for some reason, there's a connection there. So I would say, like, if you're trying this, don't give up. Don't get frustrated if after a few times you keep striking out. You won't always strike out. Sometimes you'll go and read that other passage and you'll be like, oh, I get it now. These two go together. So that's cross references. Highly recommend checking them out and using them. Now, we got to say, like, this is different than just my wake up with my morning coffee. I'm only half awake yet, and I want a good feeling, like devotional reading. All right, this isn't like get your quick fix Bible thing. This is study. This is work, right? But the Bible's meant to this is meditation literature. We're supposed to put in the work on it, so it's worth making time for this. Stepbible.org is a tool that is great for this kind of stuff, because you can really easily click on a word in a passage and see what it means, see the multiple definitions, of it, if it has multiple definitions, and you can really quickly see other passages where it shows up. So I was in Colossians. Let's go back. I was in Colossians. Here's Colossians 2:17. It says, these are a shadow of things to come. And I was interested, shadow, that's kind of random for him to use the word shadow. So I clicked on the word shadow and I got to this page. And over here I see the word shadow, and that's the Greek word. I don't know Greek. I don't really care. I care about the definition, shadow, and here's the meanings. And it only shows up 7 times. That's a pretty low number for a word for the whole Bible, right? Or in this case, it's Greek, the whole New Testament. So if it's something that's shows up 300 times, I'm not going to chase down everything. But if it's something that only shows up 7 times, I want to pay attention to that. Somebody picked that word on purpose, right? So I can click on the word, and here's all 7 times. And lo and behold, right after Colossians, there's Hebrews, and it says the same thing. These are a copy and a shadow of the heavenly things, and they're talking about the same stuff. And so I can compare what the writer of Hebrews is saying with what the writer of Colossians is saying, and I can see how they're talking about the same thing, but from a little bit different angle. So stepbible.org, when you're wanting to do some digging and find the Remez, the links, that's a great tool. All right, so you found a link, or you think maybe you found a link. Now what do? This is the fun part. You play the meme game. So here's a meme that I came across recently. I have teenagers, so I get memes about teenagers. Let's watch that one more time, just because that's so funny. For me, it's more my son than my daughter. It will be like, we'll be in bed, I'll have cleaned up the kitchen, it'll be like 11 o'clock at night, and I hear bang, 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 bang. And then bang, 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 bang. And then I go out in the morning, and just the kitchen is just boom, just waylaid, waste everywhere. And he made like 4 double cheeseburgers at 11 o'clock at night or whatever. Who knows? I'm exaggerating slightly, but only slightly. Here's another meme. Once I became a parent, I finally understood the scene where Yoda gets so tired of answering Luke's questions, he just dies. If you've got like 3 and 4-year-olds, you are living in this world, right? You get it. This painting is titled, "Would It Hurt You to Put the Dirty Bowl in the Dishwasher?" I do this pose every night, all right? There's even a game about memes. There's a meme game. Did you know this? It's called What Do You Meme? And in the meme game, you draw a picture. So here's our picture. There's this girl with a smiling face, and behind her, a building is just exploding in flames. And you get a couple cards. Everyone has a card, and you got to submit your card. Which sentence do you think works the best with the meme? And so here we got, when you realize that the song you always skip is actually fire. Boom, yeah. Oh man, I get it now. Or when you're arguing with someone and Wikipedia decides you're right. Yeah, told you so. So let's psychoanalyze what we're actually doing here. What is a meme? All right, we've got a piece of content, a piece of media. In this case, it's a picture. It could be a movie. It could be something else, a story. We've got a piece of content. We've got a completely unrelated piece of content. At least on the surface, completely unrelated. We take one and we slap the other on top of it, and that's our meme, right? And the meaning changes because you put the two things together, okay? Well, we're supposed to do this with the Bible. We're supposed to play the Bible meme game. And we'll look at like, biblical writers did this, and we should do it too. So how do we play the meme game, the Bible meme game? First, you got to find a remez. So you got to find the hint, find the Easter egg, the connection, the hyperlink, whatever you want to call it, so that you can compare 2 passages, because they got to connect somehow. So you got to find the connection. And then you look at the 2 texts, one on top of the other, all right? Read them both. Soak in them both. Meditate on them both. You don't want to see how they interact right away. It takes a little bit of time sometimes. And then you see how the meaning changes. So let's practice this, okay? So here we go. Here's Psalm 43:3. The psalmist says, "Send out your light and your truth. Let them lead me. Let them bring me to your holy mountain and to your dwelling." So our Peshat, surface level, we're going to start there, right? Peshat, surface level understanding. The psalmist is praying to God, and he's using metaphorical language. He's asking God to send him 2 characters. Send me the character of light and send me the character of truth. And he's being metaphorical about this, but we know that he's separated from God. He's not with God on God's holy mountain, God's dwelling, right? He's separated from God, and he needs help getting back to God. That's the surface level meaning, right? And he's using metaphorical language to do it. But let's look for some remezes. We can find a remez about light. Here's a remez about light. In John 8:12, Jesus says, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." It's interesting that in Psalms, this psalmist is crying out for a character named Light, and Jesus says, "I am the character named Light." Think those passages have something to say to each other? I think so. What about this one? John 14:6. Jesus says to him, "I am the way and the truth and the life." So now Jesus says he's 3 names. He's the way. Oh, let's be careful with that. He's the way, he's the truth, and he's the life. And look at here, we've got the character truth. It's the same thing. And then Jesus says, "No one comes to the Father except through me." This psalm was about how somebody needed help coming to God. Jesus says, "No one can get to God but through me." All right? So we look at these together and we say, hey, we can overlap these texts and we can come up with something. So here's the meme I came up with. If I was the psalmist, I could say, Father, send out Jesus. He's the truth and the life. He's the light and the truth. He will lead me. He will bring me back to where you are so I can be with you, God. That's what the psalmist is saying, right? So that's the biblical meme game. And we're meant to play this over and over and over again. And biblical authors do this. So here's Matthew, Matthew 2. Matthew is writing about the birth of Jesus. The wise men have just come and gone, and Herod is trying to kill baby Jesus. And so Joseph, took the child and his mother by night. So Joseph took baby Jesus and Mother Mary by night and departed to Egypt and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet. And then he quotes Hosea 11:1, which says, out of Egypt I called my son. Now, if you go to Hosea and you read Hosea, it will make no sense to you why Matthew quoted this. Because Hosea isn't talking about the Messiah at all. Hosea is looking back at the Exodus story and how God, through the prophet Moses, rescued the Israelites out of Egypt. And then the Israelites kept rejecting God over and over and over again, even though God rescued them. So in Hosea, it's a damning statement. But here, Matthew says, oh, actually, that's about Jesus. How did he get that? Well, he played the meme game, right? He said, Jesus is God's son, and he came out of Egypt. And you know what? Hosea talked about that. Not only did Hosea talk about that, Matthew wants us to go back, not just to Hosea, but all the way back to the Exodus story in Exodus and see that whole story of God taking the Israelites out of Egypt and through to the promised land as being connected to Jesus. And in fact, Matthew's whole gospel, he goes over and over making connections between Jesus and the Exodus events. So Matthew's playing the meme game. All right, buckle up. This one, we're not gonna get into like interpreting this one. I don't want you to focus on what Paul is trying to, the application Paul's trying to get for us. I want you to focus on how Paul interprets other texts. That's what we're paying attention to here, okay? Paul says, tell me, you who desire to be under the law, do you not listen to the law? So he's talking to some Christians who are tempted to go back to living under Jewish legal law. And he says, actually, the law tells us something, and you're not paying attention to it. What are you not paying attention to? It was written that Abraham had two sons, one by a slave woman and one by a free woman. So this is Abraham, right? Abraham married Sarah. Sarah was barren and couldn't give birth to a child. And so they concocted this scheme where Abraham took Sarah's Egyptian slave, Hagar, and slept with her, and they conceived Ishmael. So now they've got the son Ishmael. But then God shows up and promises to Sarah, actually, no, I'm going to give you a son, and it's going to be a year from now, I'll come back and you'll give birth. And that's the promise, and out of that promise comes Isaac. So that's the story he's referencing, right? And he says, here we are, it is written that Abraham had two sons, one by a slave woman and one by a free woman. But the son of the slave was born according to the flesh. That's the story about Hagar and Ishmael, while the son of the free woman was born through the promise. Now, this may be interpreted allegorically. These women are two covenants. Anytime someone makes an allegorical interpretation, that is the Remez step, right? They're saying something is like something else. So then he says these women are two covenants. One is from Mount Sinai. What's the covenant from Mount Sinai? Like the Sinai laws, right, that the Jews lived under. Bearing children for slavery, and she is Hagar. Now, if you're a Jew, you don't think of yourself as a slave after Mount Sinai because you've been set free from Egypt, and the law is not supposed to be enslaving to you, but Paul seems to think differently, right? And not only that, you're not a son of Hagar. You're a son of Sarah if you're an Israelite. But Paul sees this all allegorically. not literally, right? Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia, and she corresponds to the present Jerusalem, for she is in slavery with her children. But Jerusalem from above is free, and she is our mother. For it is written, rejoice, O barren one who does not bear. Break forth and cry aloud, you who are not in labor. For the children of the desolate one will be more than those of the one who has a husband. Now he's quoting Isaiah 54, which has absolutely nothing to do with the Abraham story. It's talking about how after Messiah comes, then there are going to be a bunch of children who come out of nowhere. God's children come out of nowhere, and it's going to be miraculous. But he connects it back to the Abraham and Sarah story and the promise, right? With Sarah, the promise was there was no way she could give birth to children, but she did miraculously. So he's making this connection. And then he keeps going. Now you brothers like Isaac are children of the promise. He's talking not to Jews, but to Christians. And some of them are Jewish Christians. But just as that time, he who was born according to the flesh persecuted him who was born according to the spirit, so also it is now. So what was happening at that time, like Abraham, right? The son of the slave woman, Ishmael, persecuted the son of the free woman, right? Isaac. Isaac was persecuted by Ishmael. And he's saying that's happening now, except it's like the slave people are the Jews and they're persecuting the Christians. This is the interpretive move he's making. So he's saying that story long ago of Abraham and Isaac and Sarah and Ishmael, that story is playing out now in an allegorical sort of way, right? So the story about Abraham isn't really just about Abraham. That's the move he's making. And Abraham, lots of stories happened to Abraham, all right? Lots of things in his life, but we're only told a few stories. And Paul is saying that those few stories that are picked for us are meant to tell us something about us, not just about Abraham. So then he keeps going. But what does the scripture say? Scripture says, cast out the slave woman and her son, for the son of the slave woman shall not inherit with the son of the free woman. Now he's quoting from the actual story, and this quote is what Sarah says. But Sarah says this in a really like despicable, evil sort of way. Like what she says is not righteous and not good. But here he quotes it as, at this time though, actually like, no, for us, it is appropriate. So brothers, we are not children of the slave, but of the free woman for freedom. And now he gets to the part we like, the application. For freedom, Christ has set us free. Stand firm then and do not submit again to the yoke of slavery. And that's where we camp out. When all the rest of the stuff that we read, I mean, even as we were reading it, your eyes were kind of glazing over and my eyes were kind of glazing over and I'm having trouble describing what's happening. Paul was a rabbi. Paul was trained in Pharisaic rabbinic school. He could make the rabbi moves better than anybody. And then he was trained under Jesus as well, right? So Paul can do these rabbi, like Remez moves better than we're ever going to be able to do them. That doesn't mean we shouldn't try, and that doesn't mean we're not able to. But he's given us an example that this is totally appropriate to do. We should read a text. We should ask what else is like this, and there are going to be things in our lives and in other parts of the Bible that are like it in some way, and it might not be a direct literal way, but somehow they're connected, and we can play the meme game and overlap the things.